I couldn't even guess, is that in this state of war that we're in, that the military would get a waiver from this law. It's a law that you cannot carry a gun if you have been convicted of a misdemeanor or felony in domestic violence. And yet what they've done is gotten moral waivers. Moral waivers, can you imagine that kind of even language? For perpetrators of violence in the family scene to enter the military. And one of the reasons this is necessary is the systematic discrimination against women. There are many women that want to serve. There's still a quota system against us because of a combat restriction, which is also a fraud. As you all know, women are in combat, but we maintain this fiction. And by maintaining the fiction, we keep the numbers down. So very qualified women are turned down, while unqualified men who even have criminal records are being accepted. Some of the people who are the perpetrators of this violence are indeed people who have had these waivers. The system needs to be changed. And the reason I've said this is that, put it in that perspective, I worked on that handgun control law so that there would be protection from people who are so violent. I never thought that our own military would violate that law. And so that's just one of the reasons that we stand here, that this case is so necessary. I salute the people who are here. You are in a long line of courageous men and women who've stood up to injustice in our system. We will eventually prevail because there is no question this injures everybody. And so take courage in that. It might take time, but believe me, there's many of us who are working to shorten that time span. We want justice now, and we think that it can be done. And this case demands that there is a change in process. A person there has to be a process where the victim can go outside and report outside of the chain of command, so there's no cover-up. Or indeed that the person they're reporting to could be the violator. There obviously must be a way out of the system so that they can get into courts faster, or that they can have an arbitrator who understands the seriousness of it and demands that it change and punishes in a serious way the perpetrator. In case after case, the perpetrator is not only not punished, they frequently are promoted. They're not only promoted, they're frequently still made to command the person who has been their victim. This is an outrage. The process must change. It should change now. There would be no need for this case if it was taken seriously, to the means that the process, they would institute immediately a system that would defend the victim, penalize in a serious way the criminal, and not defend that criminal or perpetuate it, not only for people within the military, but obviously these people go on to attack people in the civilian population or indeed their own family. One of the things I want to make very clear, we're not talking about all men. In fact, a very small percentage of men are the perpetrators. Studies have shown, not only in the Navy, but in civilian studies, that 95% of rape and assaults are done by serial repeat offenders. Therefore, if you let an offender go, they go on to attack other people. This is not something you can turn the cheek on. Just get that straight, that figure. 95% of rapes are done by serial rapists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Now I'd like to introduce Anu Bhagwati. Anu is the Executive Director of Service Women's Action Network, SWAN, a nonprofit human rights organization that advocates for and provides direct services to service women, women veterans, and their families. Anu is a Marine Corps veteran who left the service at the rank of captain in 2004. Anu Bhagwati.
Good morning. My name is Anu Bhagwati. I'm a former captain in the United States Marine Corps. I'm now Executive Director of Service Women's Action Network. a national advocacy organization that is working to transform military culture by securing equal opportunity and the freedom to serve in uniform without threat of harassment, discrimination, intimidation, or assault. In addition to policy work on military sexual violence, our National Peer Support Helpline serves military women across the globe. Today, I stand in solidarity with the courageous women and men who have served in our nation's armed forces. The inspirational plaintiffs you see before you are a small handful of the tens of thousands of troops and veterans who have been sexually brutalized and physically and psychologically tortured by their fellow service members while defending our nation. Rape, sexual assault, and sexual harassment are a plague upon the United States military. A pervasive climate of sexual violence and intimidation threatens our national security by undermining operational readiness, draining morale, harming retention, and destroying lives. As a Marine commander, I witnessed my own senior officers violate sexual harassment and sexual assault policies, shirk their responsibilities to their own troops, and lie to families by ignoring reports of abuse, transferring sexual predators out of their units instead of prosecuting them, promoting sexual predators during ongoing investigations, and accusing highly decorated enlisted service members of lying about their abuse simply because they were women. Any attempt to hold these officers accountable was met with threats and retaliation. I saw some of the nation's finest service members leave the military after their abuse and betrayal, while their perpetrators and the officers who willingly protected them to this day remain in uniform. Today, as the head of an organization devoted to eliminating sexual violence from our military, I see that little, if anything, has changed. The government has studied this issue for decades, over multiple administrations, and yet assaults on our troops continue year after year with no end in sight. We have reached a crisis point with this issue. In fiscal year 2009, 3,230 service members reported rape or sexual assault throughout the military. But the Department of Defense itself acknowledges that 80% of sexual assault survivors do not report this crime. If we do the math, in 2009, approximately 16,150 service members were sexually assaulted. The vast majority of victims are junior enlisted. In an institution where rank and chain of command determine your every move, sexual predators often exert power and violence over those with the least amount of rank. There are well-founded reasons that so few women and men report the crimes committed against them. Reporting sexual assault and sexual harassment in the military is brutally intimidating at best and a death sentence at worst. Perpetrators often guarantee a victim's silence by threat of retaliation. Also, unsympathetic commanders who fail to protect survivors are all too common. Oftentimes, it is commanders who are complicit in cover-ups of these cases. In this context, encouraging victims to report is irresponsible at best, and yet the Department of Defense is relentlessly focused on getting more women and men to report, without doing anything to put perpetrators behind bars, without guaranteeing survivors' personal safety, anonymity and confidentiality, privileged communication with victims' advocates, or access to a lawyer. The work of the Department of Defense's tiny Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office, or SAPRO, largely consists of poster campaigns, data collection, and provision of training and education materials to the armed forces. It should not be a surprise that the military cannot stem the tide of sexual assault in the ranks because SAPRO has no teeth. And it has no teeth because the Department of Defense has deliberately not vested it with any judicial or law enforcement authority. SAPRO's notorious poster campaigns to prevent rape are rife with victim blaming and rape mythology, including a shocking poster that encourages servicemen to wait until she's sober. As for punishment, fewer than 1 in 5 sexual predators ever see the inside of a courtroom. Most walk away with slaps on the wrist instead of jail time. We know that sexual predators are often serial offenders, and yet the military not only fails to prosecute and convict most of them, it also fails to provide a sexual offender registry to civilian authorities, allowing military perpetrators to continue preying upon victims in civilian communities across the nation. Rape, sexual assault, and sexual harassment are often career enders for victims. Unlike in the civilian world, a military rape survivor cannot quit her or his job or relocate to a different community. They are often forced to live with, or work under the supervision of their perpetrators. Unlike in the civilian world, survivors have no access to redress when their chain of command fails to protect them